What does it mean to believe in God? The 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein was one of the most influential figures in the 20th century. He began his work doing work with Bertrand Russell on questions having to do with logic. And over the course of his career, he began to focus more on language and what language discloses about the human situation. He writes in direct opposition to philosophers who came before him, one of whom was René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher who was returning from the religious wars in Europe and was in an inn sitting by the fire and came up with a logical argument that he felt proved the existence of God. And the argument goes like this. Descartes sat, and as he watched the fire, he tried to imagine that and began to doubt all the things that anyone had ever told him, all that he'd learned about theology or philosophy or the Bible, all that he'd learned from the people who loved him. He doubted the existence of everything around him, and he realized that you cannot doubt the existence of the being that's doing the thinking. So that's where his famous saying, "I think, therefore I am," comes from. And when he believed in that person who was doing the doubting, that person who was doing the thinking, he realized that he did not invent himself, that he did not create himself. And so that helped him to imagine what God was like. God was the creative force that brought him into being. In many ways, this rationalistic, this individualistic, this idea of doubting all of our sense experiences, doubting our interpersonal experiences, that as being the basis for knowledge, that is what Wittgenstein tried to overthrow. He said that it's really crucially important how we talk to each other, how we're in relation to each other, what we learn from one another. And language is not so much like a model of how the world is out there, but the language is a part of that world also. So the word God is not a symbol for something that we experience out in the ether. The word God is part of a huge language that includes the communion bread. It includes the painting by Michelangelo, The Last Supper. It includes all our interactions with people we love and care about. So that is what reality is. Reality is an experience that we share with one another as we enter into different language games which have their own rules about how we express ourselves. So for Wittgenstein, he said that in his journals at one point, he said that if he could only get out of his own way, if he could only kind of move past the constantly chattering ego, he knows that he would have an experience of God being near at hand to him. And I think many of us also have this intuition that what we need to have saved in us isn't our abstract thought, our philosophical thinking, our rational being. What we need saving is our soul, our sense of connection to one another and to God. In so many ways, we depend on each other for our language of divinity, for how we are going to understand anything. It's like when a child falls, the child looks to the adult to see if the adult looks alarmed, and then the child knows whether it is going to cry or not. And that's what we're like too. We're learning from each other. We're growing in faith from each other. We depend on each other for our connections to God. In many ways, I can't summarize the thought of Ludwig Wittgenstein in a very short message to you, but I can express the idea that what we need saved is not our rational being, but ourselves, and that we do that in communion with other people, and we do that in conversation with others who share the same values. What really matters about us is what we do, and what we feel, and what we believe, and how we conceptualize things. That's of secondary importance. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Thanks for watching More Good News.